The millionaire was called crazy for adopting her, but she turned out to be a true genius. When the world collapses, not loudly or tragically, but coldly and calculatingly, a person is left alone with silence. James Reynolds was a billionaire, a leader, the creator of a financial empire. But one day, he woke up not in a skyscraper, but in a modest apartment with $1 in his pocket and without an answer to the main question: why live now? His name was James Reynolds, and once, just a year ago, this name inspired respect, envy, fear, and emulation. His company, Raintech Finance, managed assets worth a sum that even in figures few could read at first. But now all that had turned to dust. He sat in the shabby kitchen of his rented apartment. A mug of cheap instant coffee stood on the table. A scrap of paper floated in its depths. Everything, like himself, looked tired and unnecessary. 8 months had passed since Victor Blackwood, his partner, co-founder, and seemingly friend, smiled at him, only to disappear a day later, along with billions, plunging Raintech into a controlled collapse. The phones went silent, the lawyers left, the friends forgot. The press made him a symbol of his downfall. They called him Reynolds Syndrome. When blind trust in a partner turns into disaster, it all started, as always, from within. The algorithm controlled by the Talon system, into which they had invested years of work, suddenly began to behave strangely. System failures, panic selling, liquidity disruptions. 3 days later, Raintech ceased to exist as a structure, and Victor was gone. That day, James left the house almost mechanically. It was cold outside. The air cut his skin. He knew he had his last $1 bill in his wallet, just to remember how it all began. With $1, with an idea, with a dream. He stopped at the subway. A girl of about 10 was sitting next to him. In front of her was a cardboard box with a dozen paper cranes. The box was written in uneven letters. Origami. 1 crane, $1 to cure grandma. He wanted to pass by, but the girl's dark eyes, without fear, without self-pity, stopped him. They looked not like a child's, but like a person who had been through too much. "How much is everything?" he asked. She blinked and shrugged. "If everything, it can be 8, but Grandma doesn't like it when I lower the price." James took out his last dollar. "I only have 1, but I can buy 1 crane and lunch." She thought for a moment, then nodded. They were sitting in a cheap cafe. The girl didn't ask for a menu. She knew what she wanted: scrambled eggs and bacon. While she ate, James mechanically looked out the window, but noticed how she was continuously doodling something on a napkin. When he looked in, he froze. Written on a napkin were integrals, graphs, numerical sequences, the most complex equations, and all with perfect logic. Not a single mistake. The handwriting was crisp, like a mathematician's. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia, do you like math?" "I dream about it," she replied without looking up. "When Grandma's in the hospital, I think counting is order. It means everything can still be balanced." He didn't know what to say. His mind, once capable of analyzing financial flows in real time, was at that moment occupied with only one thought. This wasn't just a child, this was a miracle. A week later, Sophia was already living with him. He gathered his willpower and contacted Scarlett's former friend, a social worker. He told the truth, submitted the paperwork, and said bluntly, "I don't just want to borrow her for a while, I want her to stay with me." Scarlett looked at him doubtfully. His reputation was in ruins. No income. The court didn't even want to hear it. But then they saw them together, saw how Sophia held his hand, how she protected him, asking for nothing in return. And the court granted them temporary custody. Sophia went to a regular school. In her first week, she corrected her math teacher. In her second, she won a city tournament, and by her fourth, she was leading a club for high school students. But in the evenings, when classes were over, she sat down at her laptop and started playing with numbers, stock market data, charts, algorithms. It was her native language. One day, waking up at 3 a.m., James found her at her desk. She was staring at the screen, frowning, then turned to him and said, "You didn't fall. You were pushed. I have proof." He didn't believe it at first, but when she showed him the logs, the deviations, and one strange repeating loop in the algorithm that couldn't have happened by chance, he realized Victor hadn't simply betrayed her. He'd implanted a virus into the system itself, designed to destroy everything and transfer assets according to a predetermined scenario. At that moment, a story unfolded that no one expected. A story in which a former billionaire and a girl with cranes decided to bring justice not for the sake of revenge, but so that people like Victor Blackwood could no longer ruin lives with impunity. Sophia sat on the windowsill, chewing on a pencil. Behind her lay a pile of papers, calculations, and diagrams. James stood by the door, watching. He felt strange, at home, but still like a guest in his own life. The walls of the apartment were the same. Peeling plaster, the smell of old parquet, dim lighting. But with her appearance, meaning settled into these walls. Sophia turned around. "I don't understand," she said. "Why didn't anyone see this before? It's all in the logs, right there." "Because they looked with their eyes, not their heads," answered James. "Or because they didn't want to see." She nodded, as if she had known it since birth. "Did you know that 80% of financial collapses involve algorithmic anomalies that no one explained? They just bury them under the rug." "Now I know," he answered with a smile. "Sophia, you do realize you're special, right?" "I just don't get distracted," she shrugged. "I like to think. My grandmother always had a sign on the refrigerator. Your brain is the only thing you can't take away if you develop it." The next day, they went to school again. James led her by the hand, and for the first time in months, he felt like he was going nowhere. She didn't let go of his hand, even at the entrance. And in that moment, he suddenly realized she was his family, not by blood, but by decision, by choice. He returned home, and, without waiting for her to hesitate, called Scarlett again. She didn't answer right away. Her voice was dry. "Yes, I'm officially filing for adoption." "James," she fell silent. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure than I was now." The first court hearings were humiliating. The prosecutor pressed his questions. "How are you going to support her? You have no company, no property, not even a stable income. Wouldn't the girl be better off in a wealthy family? You know your reputation is in question right now." But Sophia intervened, neither by permission nor by request, simply stood up and said, "If you send me to strangers, I will still run away and come back. He's not perfect, but he's my person, and that's more important than anything you can offer." The judge looked at her over his glasses, then at James, then wrote something down. An hour later, the ruling was clear. Temporary custody extended. The case is pending adoption. "Do you know what you did?" he asked that evening, as they ate macaroni and cheese. "Yes, I broke protocol, but I don't apologize," she replied, sprinkling dried basil on her pasta. "Why?" "And because when you were in court, you kept your hand in a fist to hide your fear. And I know that when an adult is afraid, it means they really want something. I really do." "Yes." He didn't answer. He just hugged her. She didn't resist. Sophia continued to develop at an incredible rate. At school, even the principal gave in. She agreed to transfer her to an individual program. An invitation came from the University of Communications to participate in a program for gifted children. Sophia refused. "I have a more important project," she said. "I need to deal with whoever stole your life." That evening, she was sitting at her laptop again. James came up from behind. "What are you looking for?" "Algorithm behavior patterns," she said. "I think Victor used a predictive failure mechanism." "What is this?" "An algorithm that doesn't just react to the market, but itself causes certain actions in other algorithms. It, like a virus, infects others through behavior, triggering a cascading failure at the right moment. And this can be proven if we have access to the source code or to the system log, but we don't have it." He froze for a second. "Maybe I know who maybe." "And who did he keep silent about?" "Sarah, my senior architect. She left 2 weeks before the collapse. Without a scandal, without explanation. I think she suspected something." Sophia immediately perked up. "Then I need to talk to her urgently." Contacting Sarah turned out to be difficult. Her numbers no longer worked. The mail was silent. James made up his mind and went to the old address. A house in the quiet streets area, with tall trees and green fences. He didn't expect to find her. But the door opened, and he saw her as before. Sarah was still the same, straight, collected, with a quick look and careful speech. "James," she said calmly, "I was waiting for you to come. Did you know? I suspected, that's why I left. You still have the magazines, only copies. I'm not stupid." There was a map hanging on the wall in Sophia's room, but not a geographical one, not of the world or cities. It was a map of interconnections, lines between companies, foundations, anonymous offshore companies, digital intermediaries. It looked like a satellite image of the starry sky, but there was a clear focus at its center. The name Blackwood. Sophia traced it with her finger. Look, these 4 Cayman Islands companies are not formally connected, but they all share the same investment structure. Northeast Trading System, registered in Latvia. And who founded it? A certain Gareth Stoltz, Victor Blackwood's accountant. His name appeared during the final phase of your company's collapse. James listened silently. He was scared, but he couldn't stop. Are you sure this isn't just a coincidence? A coincidence is when 2 events are random, but when 7 dots align with a line of events, it's called a pattern. Sarah added, I checked your old terminal server, deleted 2 days before the crash. The log is fake, but the handwriting gives it away. It was Victor or someone using his keys. They began to piece together the puzzle. Sarah hacked into old archives, found backup copies of transactions. Sophia analyzed them, building a chain of dependencies. James was compiling a legal dossier, documents that could become evidence, but they still didn't know they were being monitored. The suspicion arose accidentally. Sophia left her notebook in the living room, and Scarlett, who came for another inspection, opened it without permission. James saw it. She immediately apologized and laughed it off. Habit, a social reflex, but James sensed something. He used to play poker at the highest level and knew when someone was bluffing. Then he did something he would have considered paranoid in the past. He checked her through his old channels. The data arrived within 24 hours. Scarlett wasn't a full-time civil servant. She was listed as an external consultant through a foundation linked to one of Blackwood's old partners. He immediately contacted Sarah and Sophia. They're listening to us. Everything we say, everything we do. Most likely, she had access to everything we submitted to the court, to the Child Protection Service. Sophia nodded. Then we activate the backup plan. What? She smiled. Encryption. I've already written a protocol. All data will be automatically backed up to the cloud under the guise of training test archives, so no one will guess. Even if our equipment is taken away, the information will go on. And then where? To a dozen anonymous email addresses. One of them is my own channel on a scientific forum. If anything happens, I'll publish everything as open source. Sarah looked at her with respect. Girl, you don't belong in school. You need your own agency. Justice first, Sophia answered calmly. The next day, Scarlett came again with her usual smile and a chocolate bar for Sophia. How are you, dear? Sophia accepted the chocolate bar and said quietly, Thank you. But next time, bring a tangerine. Chocolate rots your teeth. This was a prearranged phrase, a signal. When Scarlett left, they packed their bags. The evacuation plan was simple. James would remain in the city and continue to live as usual, communicating with Scarlett and demonstrating that nothing was happening. Sophia and Sarah would leave for a safe place. Sarah's house outside the city, where there were no signals, no cameras from prying eyes. All files were encrypted, access to them only through special key phrases that only Sophia knew. The final part of the plan was preparing for the public exposure. They separated at the station. James hugged Sophia. She was calm. Too calm for a child. You will definitely come back. Only when you are ready to tell the whole world. I am ready. No, you'll be ready when you have the whole truth. He nodded silently, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like they believed him. No strings attached, no insurance. A week later, James received a letter with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a note. We're close. Just a little while longer. Wait for the signal. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop. On the screen was code, as complex as a living organism. And at its center, a file name. Phoenix, version 1. Sophia. On an old farm outside the city, among grassy fields and humming power lines, Sarah was installing an antenna. Her fingers worked precisely and quickly. Sophia sat in the barn, surrounded by laptops, wires, and hard drives. Her face was illuminated by the dim light of the screen, on which lines of code ran like a living stream. Perimeter secure, Sarah said. The signal was jammed, the camera was covered. How are you? Almost there. I created an algorithm that doesn't just replicate what Blackwood did. It reads it, analyzes it, and reproduces patterns in real time. We'll have an exact model of how he brought down the company, an irrefutable mathematical proof. Will they be able to understand it in court? If not, I'll draw them pictures, but first, publication. Meanwhile, in the city, James continued to play the role. He began showing up again at conferences, seminars, and dinners for former financiers. He knew they were discussing him. Some out of pity, some out of curiosity. He didn't make excuses, just listened, and slowly began to pour out information. "We all know there was nothing natural about Raintech's fall," he said behind the scenes. "Someone set the course, someone bet on the collapse." He saw faces tense, someone nervously sip whiskey, someone turn away. A couple of days later, he received a call from someone from his old circle. "Do you want to live, James? Keep quiet. This isn't the stock exchange, it's chess." "Then let it be a game," he replied and hung up. Sophia had finally completed the prototype. It was a self-learning analytical algorithm capable of detecting deviations in trading system behavior in real time, pointing out intentional glitches, and identifying connections between participants. "It can be used as a shield," she said. "If we release it publicly, it will be used worldwide. It will become the standard, and then, even if they try to silence us, it will be too late. It will cause a storm," Sarah noted. "Companies will lose billions if evidence of manipulation starts to surface." "That's why we need to act quickly," Sophia replied. In parallel, they compiled Blackwood's dossier, more than 300 pages of documents, logs, transfer schemes, fake companies, and correspondence. They forwarded it to several anonymous channels, journalists, regulators, even a closed group of former Reintech employees who could be affected by the scam. The final step required a distraction. James proposed an idea. Let them think I'd found everyone and was ready to negotiate. He contacted the man who had called him earlier again and said, "I have the information. We can settle this quietly. Half the assets, and I'm gone." The answer came a day later. They set up a meeting. The location was a restaurant on the roof of a private club. A warm evening breeze. Blackwood appeared in a strict dark suit, without security. His face was calm, almost indifferent. "James," he said, "I admit, you surprised me. I'm alive and I remember. And what do you want? Money?" "No, offer it yourself." Blackwood looked into his eyes. "Half. Through a chain of trust funds, without a trace. In exchange, you leave, and the girls too." James paused, then said, "And if I refuse, then you die. Maybe not right away, maybe not literally, but you disappear, and no one will remember. People like you don't survive." James smiled. "I've already survived. You just didn't notice." He got up and left. The next morning, Sophia's algorithm was published on all major scientific and financial platforms. It was accompanied by a manifesto. "This code is not a weapon, it's a mirror. If you're afraid to look into it, you need it. We're not calling for war, we're calling for honesty." The file spread around the world. Commentators, experts, investors, everyone started talking. They started testing it, running it, and almost immediately, anomalies surfaced in various systems, in various countries. Simultaneously, data from Blackwood's dossier was transferred to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Financial Police, and 4 major independent publications. One of them, Voice of Capital, immediately published an investigation. 3 days later, Blackwood was arrested. His assets were frozen. Mass investigations began. Former Reintech employees who proved they lost everything due to collusion were given a chance for compensation. But most importantly, no one could hide who exactly created the algorithm. Sophia's name appeared everywhere, not as a genius, but as a symbol. They called her the girl who stopped the chaos. And although she hated the headlines, she knew the world had changed. When James returned to her house, she rushed to him, just like on that first day when they went out for buckwheat and a cutlet. "We did it. We started," he said. "The main thing is not to stop." 2 weeks had passed since the arrest of Victor Blackwood. The media continued to discuss not only the revelations, but also a new sensation. The publication of an algorithm developed by an 11-year-old girl who had outperformed entire teams of analysts with her calculations. James Reynolds' reputation began to return, not as a powerful billionaire, but as a man who had not broken. He refused interviews. Sophia, too. The only thing they allowed was a small open lecture at the science club, where they invited students, school children, and budding analysts. That evening, Sophia stood on stage in front of hundreds of eyes. "I'm not one for beautiful words," she began. "But I want to be honest, I was lucky. I met someone who saw in me not just a child, but a strength. And I want more stories like this." She raised her head. "That's why James and I are launching a foundation. It will help children who have found themselves in difficult circumstances but haven't given up. We will look for those who can change the world if given a chance. We called it simply Phoenix. The audience gave a standing ovation. Meanwhile, the authorities began investigating other cases. It turned out that Blackwood and his partners had been using a scheme for decades to introduce flawed algorithms not only to ruin competitors, but also to create panic in the stock markets. His arrest became a catalyst for reform in the regulation of algorithmic trading. The Securities and Exchange Commission officially announced, the algorithm created by Sophia is recommended for use as a mandatory component of risk assessment for all major platforms. But for James, something else was more important. He received an official letter. The court ruled to grant James Reynolds' application to adopt Sofia Ivanovna Tarnova. The girl is recognized as his biological daughter. The decision takes effect immediately. He reread the letter 3 times, then went into her room. Sophia sat, staring at her tablet. The screen displayed financial flows for the past 24 hours. "You have 2 pieces of news," she said, without raising her head. "You received a letter, and you couldn't resist reading it out loud." "Yes," he smiled. "You became my daughter, a real one. Not by law, but by fact." She nodded, then stood up, walked over, and hugged him tightly, silently. It wasn't a childish impulse. It was a mature, conscious gesture. She chose him, just as he had chosen her. A month later, the Phoenix Foundation began its work. The first program was scholarships for children from disadvantaged families with a high level of ability in mathematics and analytics. The second was a course in ethics and digital finance, where Sophia herself lectured. She hadn't yet fully learned to express her emotions, but when children approached her after class, she lit up. "I never thought I'd be teaching," she told James. "But I think I like it, because you don't just teach, you give them hope." Sarah left for Sweden. She turned down a position at an international corporation and joined the project as a security advisor. The 3 of them, the former billionaire, the girl genius, and the female programmer, became the core of a new movement. Margarita was arrested. She refused to testify, but documents were found among her belongings linking her to a shadowy foundation that managed Blackwood's assets. Now her case became part of a larger investigation. One winter, James stood by the window. Snow was slowly falling outside. Sophia approached and asked, "Do you miss your old life?" He thought, "No, because then I had everything except meaning, and now I do, and money can't buy it." She nodded, so the formula worked. And what is the formula for justice? Where the variables aren't money, but people. Where the outcome isn't the score, but the consequences. Where victory isn't revenge, but restoration. He smiled. A complex formula, but true, she said, like everything real.